Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very, very much for filling the centre tonight. First, to say that this is jointly presented by Ropetackle and the Shoreham Society, so it's a joint invitation to you and to the candidates. The rules of the game are going to be, by the way, I've worn shorts for two reasons. One is I think that politics should be human, and secondly, I've got terrific legs. So that's the other reason. So here, and those of you at the back, I'll pop by later. So here are the rules of the game. So I'm going to ask each of the candidates, and they drew lots earlier on as to the order. I'm going to ask each of the candidates to present for 5 minutes. I will ask them questions or some questions after their presentation. So that will be the first half of the evening. We will have 5 minutes. I will have some questions. The next candidate, 5 minutes. I will have some questions. We will then have an interval, which will be brilliant because you can go to the bar and you can make generous donations that way to Ropetackle. And in the interval, if you want to write questions down, please do. I will sort them through in the interval, and we will have about half an hour or so afterwards to have audience questions. So I will try and theme them or group them and pick the ones that seem most germane. And I will ask you to ask your question. So I'll have it in front of me, but I will ask you to ask your question so we can hear your voice, because I think that's more fun than you endlessly hearing my voice. At least that's what my husband says. Right, so that's the way it's going to run. So we drew lots before. The order is going to be Tom Rutland, who is the Labour candidate, Layla Williams, who is the Conservative candidate, David Batchelor, who is the Liberal Democrat candidate, and Demi Wildman, who is the Green Party candidate. There is one other candidate who was asked from the major parties, and that is Lionel Roger from the Reform Party. He was asked, he was told, unfortunately, he has another arrangement, an appointment, and so cannot be here. There are also, on the ballot paper, there are also 3 independent candidates. Ropetackle's board took advice from the Electoral Commission and the Charity Commission, and that is why you see the candidates on the platform that you do, because that is according to the guidance from the 2 commissions. And also, they are the representatives of national parties. And we do understand that there are other voices nonetheless to make it a manageable evening to take advice from the 2 commissions. That was the decision that Ropetackle board took. So I hope you agree with that and you're fine with that. So thank you very much indeed. So we'll start off. Tom, if you could, crack on up to the pulpit there.
Lectern, okay.
And you can stay here if you like. But,
great.
I mean, that Tom put that up, so use it, with my point, and on we go.
Thank you, Simon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Rutland, and I'm Labour's candidate here in East Worthing and Shoreham in next week's election. It's time for change. Not just a slogan from the Labour Party, but what I've heard time and time again from the 20,000 voters that me and my team have spoken with over the past 7 months. Because my neighbours in Lancing and people across East Worthing and Shoreham have been badly let down by the last 14 years. The Conservatives have left our community and our country worse off than when they started. Locally, that means mortgages up by more than £330 a month, home ownership being a distant dream for young people who face being renters for life, earnings down by £76 a week, raw, filthy sewage polluting the River Ada and our beautiful coastline, and children in Shoreham being sent to school miles from home because of foreseeable shortages in secondary school places. NHS waiting lists and ambulance waiting times are through the roof, with my research finding a patient in Southwick waiting almost an hour and a half for an ambulance, despite facing a life-threatening situation. Enough is enough. Labour's got a long-term, serious plan to change things for the better. We'll deliver economic stability, cut NHS waiting times with 40,000 more appointments each week, crack down on antisocial behaviour with 13,000 additional neighbourhood police, recruit 6,500 new teachers to give every child the best start in life, deliver the biggest boost to affordable house building in a generation, and make the water companies clean up their filth. All of our pledges are fully costed and fully funded because we will never play fast and loose with the nation's finances as the Conservatives did when they crashed the economy and left all of us to deal with a dreadful cost of living crisis. I've spent my career fighting for fairness and justice, helping people get a fair deal at work, pushing for investment in clean and renewable energy, and tackling scammers ripping off vulnerable consumers, including pensioners. And when my granddad passed away in the pandemic, I trained to be a volunteer vaccinator so that other families didn't have to go through what mine did after so long apart. But every campaigning win I've had in my career has had to be wrestled from a Conservative government that hasn't had ordinary people in mind. That's why I'm standing to be our MP, because I know that the change that we need will only come from a Labour government. And so those are the values and experiences that I want to take to Parliament to stand up for our community. No second jobs, just hard work, regular advice surgeries, a fully staffed office on the high street, and an MP that is on your side. I know you'll have received some leaflets from some other parties suggesting that only someone who's lived here all their life can understand local issues. And sure, I'm not the candidate who's lived here the longest, and not just because I'm the youngest on the stage. Like many of you, I've made this beautiful place my home. I grew up about 30 miles away in Kent, near Tunbridge Wells, right on the border with Sussex, went to a local state school before going to university and moving to London for work. And then at the start of this year, having been chosen as Labour's candidate, I moved to Lancing, and I love it here. And through our relentless efforts, all 20,000 conversations with voters, with schools, with businesses, with NHS workers, parents, police officers, I hope I've got a pretty good idea of the local issues affecting local people, many of which I've already outlined. But I also know which party has caused them. And this election is a choice between 5 more years of chaos and decline with the Conservatives or national renewal with the Labour Party, between an MP who offers more of the same or an MP who can be a strong voice in a new government ready to turn this country around. I know what the polls say, and I know that some people think that this election and this result is a foregone conclusion, but not me.
1 minute.
We've never had a Labour MP before, but we need to elect our first one ever to remove the Conservatives from government and get our community's future back. It's not going to be easy. Nothing's in the bag. So if you want change, you have got to vote for it. You can stop the chaos, you can turn the page, and you can start to rebuild our country. And you can do that by voting Labour on the 4th of July.
So, Tom, fully costed. So, just to quote you, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who talks about both parties or all parties having a conspiracy of silence about tax and spend. I mean, your election manifesto, the Labour election manifesto, says pledge not to increase existing income tax rates, national insurance or VAT. What taxes will you increase in order to pay for what it is you say you need to do?
Well, we're inheriting if we get elected next week.
No, that's not what I'm asking you, whether you're inheriting. I'm asking you, what taxes will you raise or need to raise in order to get the investment to do the things you say you need to do?
Well, we're going to be taxing private school places, or rather charging VAT to private schools. This is a difficult decision to make, but as I say, we're inheriting an economy that is not in a good place, and that's going to pay for our offer for young people and for children, 6,500 additional teachers, childcare places in primary schools to allow people to go back to work and access 15 hours of free childcare that they're currently not always able to access despite the government introducing it. And that will also allow people to go to nursery and school at the same time. So that's one of the tax-raising measures that we will be raising.
OK, 40,000 more appointments a week by paying staff more to work weekends and evenings.
Yep.
How's that going to happen in the NHS? I mean, you're just going to pour more money in, and if so, where from, or what's going to happen? How's that going to work?
So the way that will be funded is through closing tax evasion loopholes and ending the non-dom status properly so that we can get those 40,000 additional appointments a week, not just for GPs, but across secondary care as well, dentists. I know that 8 out of 9 of the local dentists are not accepting any new NHS patients. None of them are accepting new adults, and only one is accepting children. So that's how we'll pay for that. But it won't just be a case of pouring money in. We'll also look to reform the health service too, keeping it free at the point of use and in public hands always. We're the party that founded the NHS, and we'll never change that. But making sure that the system is able to deliver additional appointments, working with healthcare professionals, paying them overtime to work evenings and weekends to clear the backlog, and then trying to bring more people, training British doctors and nurses to come through the system so we can address the staffing shortages that are currently happening.
Let me ask you a question that was asked of Keir Starmer the other day. If one of your relatives was in very, very serious state of condition and health, would you use private healthcare?
No.
Why not?
because we want to be building an NHS where anyone doesn't need private healthcare.
Don't you want to save the health of your close relative? Your granddad died in NHS hospital. Wouldn't you want to spend the money, save the money, spend the money on saving their health?
Well, that wouldn't have saved my granddad, who was misdiagnosed by a GP that was chronically underfunded and understaffed, and he wasn't able to get a face-to-face appointment that would have saved his life, and seen a proper diagnosis. So that wouldn't have really affected it in that way. But sorry.
But it's a principle, is it?
I think it's the principle. Yeah. I think it's the principle. We've done it before. We made private healthcare essentially pointless when we were last in government, and we can do it again, and that's what we'll do.
Okay. Sorry? And last question, there's been a lot of heat and light in the last few weeks about single-sex spaces. So what will I think people are very, very confused between what different people in the Labour Party and at the senior level of the Labour Party are saying about maintaining single-sex spaces, which is clearly a huge issue for women. What would you do to help the Labour Party reach a conclusion between those competing rights?
So the Labour Party introduced the Equality Act, a fantastic piece of legislation in the last government, which provided exemptions for single-sex spaces, and we've said that will continue. I think in terms of the discussion moving forward, I think there has been some political opportunism by one party, I think in particular, raising this issue. But what I really want to see is a kind of discussion where we can come to a place where nobody is treated poorly, where we have those exemptions that are in place, and where everyone's treated with dignity and respect.
What happens when they clash? That's easy to say, but in sports, rape crisis centres, domestic violence, there's a whole set of arguments around women saying, actually, we want single-sex sports, single-sex services, single-sex spaces. Other members of senior Labour members say, actually, no, we're going to go for an inclusive space, which will therefore include biological men.
We've committed to retaining those single-sex spaces in those areas.
You committed to maintaining safe spaces. You haven't committed to maintaining single-sex spaces.
Well, I think the way we have to do this is to try and bring people together in good faith and not point score. And I could certainly try and do that from this platform, but I'm not going to, because I know that hurts people, and it doesn't help us actually get to a conclusion where people can be happy. Clearly, there are issues with sport. That's very obvious. Okay. There is a very clear difference between sex and gender, but that doesn't prevent us treating people with dignity and respect and moving forward. And I've had conversations with people on both sides of this issue at the door. And generally been able to find that people are very willing to have a good conversation, but I think we've been poorly served by some people, and this is not an accusation of anyone in the audience, but some politicians in particular, trying to make this issue very unpleasant and divisive, and I think it's typical of the approach to politics we've seen in the last couple of years from the Conservative Party, where they have tried to govern in the interest of division and drawing dividing lines with Labour rather than sorting the long-term issues this country needs to be solved.
Okay, fine. Tom Rutledge. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
So, Layla Williams.
Oh, gosh, that would be good, wouldn't it? Tripping over. Good evening, everyone. And can I just say how nice it is to see so many familiar faces in the audience from both sides of all political realms. It's funny, as I was driving here, I was thinking about my childhood experiences and what had led me to this point. When I was 12, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and on coming back to school after a long period in hospital, I stood up in front of 500 girls in my school and spoke to them in a very nerve-wracking manner about the fact that my NHS bed didn't have colourful bed sheets on it, or the fact that they needed more toys at the hospital, and I persuaded that school to support me in fundraising for the Rocking Horse Appeal going forward. And I guess in some way, the fear I felt on that day is probably equal, if not surpassed, by the fear I feel now standing before you, and I guess that is what links the memory. My name is Layla Williams, and I am your Conservative Party candidate for East Worthing and Shoreham. I'm standing to be an MP because a few years ago, Tim Lawton knocked on my door, and he was canvassing for local elections, and he said, my name's Tim Lawton, I'm your MP. And I'd never met an MP before, and I had not the faintest idea of how you became one. And so I said to him, look, I'm a bit frustrated with the way things are in the NHS. What should I do about it? And he said, well, you could become an MP. So here I am. I've lived locally. I was born in Brighton and grew up in Brighton and have lived along the coast for all of my adult life bar when I went to university. I'm a local mum. I've got 2 children, one at Shoreham Academy, who's doing his best to deny my existence at the moment, and one in nursery who still thinks mummy's so funny. I've worked in the NHS for 15 years. That's the entirety of my career, and I do so because the NHS saved the quality of my life from the age of 12. I've never paid for treatment at the point of delivery, and I fully believe that that is something that should continue very, very strongly indeed. In fact, that's why I've devoted my career to try and improving services within it. However, the changes I see need to happen are bigger, in fact, than can be achieved, I think, within it. And hence, I'm standing for Parliament to try and influence it at a policy level from Parliament. I've served as an Ada district councillor. I've spent much time on the doorsteps listening to the concerns of local residents. I haven't had the run-up at this election that Tom has had because I was only selected 3 weeks ago for this post, as Tim Lawton, who has been our previous hard-working and excellent constituency MP, decided to step down. The conversations I heard both as a district councillor and in recent weeks of canvassing have been around, and I agree with Tom on this fact, the increased need for primary care. I don't think we've made it back really to the kind of primary care provision that we would like to see since COVID. And I have various ideas, having managed 2 A&Es for the last 2 years. I've got various ideas about how we could work together between hospitals and primary care to improve that provision. I also hear a great deal and empathise a great deal with the people who lose hours of their life sitting on the A27, because I start my journey in Shoreham and go all the way down to Chichester and back again at least 3 or 4 times a week. I work at Worthing 3 times a week, Southlands one day, Chichester the other. I'm fully committed to fighting for an A27 bypass because I believe it's needed to reduce the congestion and pollution that our constituents face and have been telling me about. I would be honoured to represent you as your MP. I stand here today simply to say I see a world I think I can make better, and with your support I would like to give it a go. If that's something that you can relate to, if you think we need a more diverse Parliament, I'm really pleased to see amongst all the candidates, you know, between us, one of us will be your MP for the next term of Parliament, and I'm really glad to see such a diverse and, dare I say, younger crowd. I think we will, you know, between us, one of us will be chosen as your MP. It would be my very great honour and privilege to be that person. Thank you. Can I stop?
Later, it might surprise people that in that 5 minutes, you talked about your child, you talked about the Rocking House appeal, you talked about working in the NHS, but you didn't talk about anything to do with the policies that the government, which you now seek to extend, has been putting into practice for 8, or we could argue longer than that if you took the coalition to account. So let's start with the NHS. You worked in the NHS for 15 years, but you say you want to improve the NHS. So you're saying you're going to increase spending above the inflation every year, continue programmes to build 40 new hospitals. Well, we already know that your Boris Johnson claimed that you'd already built 40 new hospitals. Now it's continued the programmes to build. What is it that you would claim is the biggest success of the last 8 years? And by the way, the last 6 chancellors and 4 prime ministers that the Conservative government have delivered to the nation. What would you claim as their biggest success?
I would say the biggest success of the NHS in recent times.
No, of the government, not of the NHS.
Of the government. Well, it's the same thing. It's the rollout of the vaccination programme that brought us back out of lockdown and enabled us to have our freedom. It was the greatest success of the NHS, and it was because a government who took decisive action to bring about the vaccines that eventually were developed
Notwithstanding
you know,
that waiting lists have got longer, that we've got an acknowledged shortage of GPs and dentists, particularly in this particular region, would you see that as a success? I mean, you're claiming it as a success.
I don't. The waiting lists have got longer, but they've also, I'm part of an effort every day to try and bring them down again. You can't stop elective care for nearly 2 years and then not see waiting lists get longer, because we've seen a complete, drying up of the capacity that we had. And in fact, we're not back to pre-COVID productivity levels yet by quite some way. So it's not just about money, it's about trying to get the resources that we had that were delivering a certain amount of activity in 1920.
So COVID is the problem. That's what created
COVID is
high
not the
mortgage
only problem.
rates.
No, COVID is not the only problem, but I'm simply saying that's a big factor contributing towards our waiting lists. And the other thing is shortage of staff. So we do need to train more doctors, more nurses. It's all very well saying, oh, we'll put lots of money in to get them working weekends and evenings to deliver more appointments, but actually I've been offering £250 an hour to any consultant that will do that work, and I'm simply told, no, I want to spend time with my family. So
it is one of the ways in which
need to
everybody
improve.
acknowledges is to create the care system, which Boris Johnson said you had solved the care system. Rather clearly, you haven't solved the care system. So wouldn't it be one of the ways would be actually bolstering the number of people who could work in care? And yet, the immigration policies, which have been in place since 2023, have seen a reduction in the number of people who've come to work in care in the country, deliberately, by the way, because that was the policy, and you've reduced the number of people who are therefore able to do that. So isn't there a problem here? If you're trying to reduce hospital beds, but you're not putting in the money to increase care, that's something you've deliberately caused as a government.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't help but agree with you. And why do you think I'm standing here? Because actually I can see that from my everyday work. And actually I think if people were to really think about actually what we need, it is not necessarily more money into the NHS, it is more money into social care, it is improving the workforce, be that by training our own staff. We need more of virtually every profession, not just doctors and nurses.
But you are standing on a manifesto that says cap the number of migrant visas as a level approved annually by MPs. In other words, part of the problem is, notwithstanding that we need to train more UK people, but what the government has done, which you're standing in place of, they have restricted that labour supply. So what I'm asking you is, in what way can you justify that if you can also argue what you're arguing?
Because we know that the issue of immigration is a very sensitive one at the moment, and which a lot of people feel that actually to have uncontrolled immigration is an incredibly difficult thing because it puts strain on the very strain on the very same public services that we're trying to save by bringing those workers in. So I think, we need a balanced approach in which we're able to access the kind of workforce that we need in the places that we need, with the funding in the right places to provide that care. But actually, I stand by I've got an email inbox full of people worried about immigration. I'm meeting them on the door. There's an awful lot of people that don't support the idea that we bring in unlimited.
But part of the reason they're worried about
country.
Immigration is in 2010, net immigration to this country was 250,000. Under your Conservative government and also the coalition, it's net 685,000. That's under your government. So that's why they're worried about immigration.
Yes.
You've done nothing about it.
Well, not for want of trying, I think.
I don't think we want an MP. These people don't want an MP who tries. They want an MP who succeeds, don't they?
Well.
Don't they?
Touché.
It's the biggest issue. If you look at the polling, the big issue for Labour supporters is cost of living. Number one issue is for Conservative voters is immigration. So would you would support the continuation of the Rwanda policy and so on?
I think the Rwanda policy is thank you. I can't say that, but members of the audience might. I have been questioned on that in Conservative forums as well, and my view is that we shouldn't have. Rwanda has a bad human rights record. We should never have engaged in that being the country. But well, to pick a country that's synonymous with a bad human rights record is not. Probably is not one of.
Tom, do you want a job share with Labour?
What about working practices?
The deterrent, the principle of a deterrent, the idea that we need to stop the boats, the absolute principle that we must control immigration, I think, is absolutely something I would support. I wouldn't necessarily agree with the means by which we've tried to achieve it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Layla Williams. So next up is David Batchelor, who is the Liberal Democrat candidate.
Thank you very much. Well, my evening is complete because Layla has described me as one of the younger group. So that's a win. So what should we talk about this evening? If we had one of these events over the last two years, you know, the main thing we'd all be talking about would be tactical voting and how we're going to come together to change this government. Well, we really don't need to talk about that anymore. Rishi's kind of sealed that fate when he stood in the rain outside of number 10 doing the world's worst mime to things can only get better. And at risk of provoking the Gambling Commission, I think I can tell you now we are going to have a Labour government in a week's time. But the issue is, how are they going to make things better? And I think that's kind of the debate that we need to have tonight. Because all the problems are still going to be there. The economy's faltering. The NHS is on its knees. Our schools are crumbling. And locally, we kind of, you know, we've all lived the issues. It's housing, it's employment, it's inappropriate development. That's all still going to be there. And as Labour tries to get to grips with all that, yeah, he's going to have his hands full. But not only that, we're going to have the new political stuff coming up, and it is all going to change. The remnants of the Conservative Party, you know, that's going to become kind of a karaoke group for the right wing. Yeah, we know what's going to happen there, and that's going to disrupt us a lot. Labour, you know, we kind of all saw, when you get a big majority for Labour, what the risk is. We saw it in Worthing. They had a big win in the local election. And then a couple of days later, 3 of them left to set up, you know, Worthing workers or something. I don't know what they were called, sorry. You know, they were elected on moderate Labour, and then they kind of think it's all right to go. So, you know, there's going to be a lot of noisy, scary stuff going on, and that's why you kind of need us. We're going to be an opposition that's going to hold Labour to account, not just placate the factions and play to headlines. Yeah, we're going to focus on the things that are important, effective, constructive opposition, and ensures that Labour isn't going to row back on what it says. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, the economy. The only way out of this mess is growth. If we don't get growth, we're going to be a high tax, low service economy for years to come. We need to make sure that Labour follows through. And that means supporting small, successful businesses. We're going to hold them to account on that. And then Europe. Yeah, we can't rebuild this economy unless we've got good relations with Europe. Yeah, we can't have the Boris Johnson cake and eat it approach. Yeah, if we want free trade, there's got to be free movement of people. Live up to it, get on with it, do it. We're going to hold Labour to that. Health service, free at the point of delivery. Yes, that's what we all want, but there isn't something that comes after that which says health service free at the point of delivery, provided it fits with our political theory. We just want a great health service. We need more GPs in there. We need better diagnostics. We need better facilities, and we need a complete overhaul of the social care system. That's what we are going to make sure gets delivered. And then climate. Labour have rowed. We know Labour have rowed back on their commitments, but actually, what we need to do is build the environment into our economy. This isn't some kind of bolt-on that if we find some money down the back of the sofa, we're going to do it. It kind of has to be built in. So that's what we, the Liberal Democrats, are doing, and that's why we're focusing on trying to win 80 seats around the country so we can be the effective opposition. But it's not just about those seats we win, it's about the national vote. So if you want to have a proper opposition out there, we've got to have a proper vote throughout the country. And that's why it makes all the difference here locally. If you believe in the things I'm saying, if you believe the government is held to account, that's why you should come for us. And locally, we've got...
Tom, are you okay?
Cheers, yeah.
What Tom? Sorry, Richard.
David. He's given me a time limit, so I can guarantee I'm going to start stammering now, but there we go.
Sorry. I was trying to give guidance.
Thank you so much. But yeah, I will keep it short. So locally, we really are in the last chance saloon. I was in the audience in 2019, and we're talking about the same things locally, but they have got worse. There are now fewer jobs and lower pay in this area than almost anywhere else. Our council has done nothing about that. Housing, 11 times average earnings is the cost. 2,000 flats along the front has done nothing but made that worse. Our health service, it's suffering. The incidence of mental health in this area is way higher than anywhere else. That's because we're not getting the right services in the right place. So these are the real issues that have been caused by our representatives. So if you want change, then we've got to force change, and Liberal Democrats is the voice that will make sure that your voice is heard.
Okay, thank you very much. So you reminded me of something there when you said that the danger of a big Labour majority is that Labour gets into power on a moderate set of promises, but then once they get into power, then they change.
I know what's coming now.
That reminded me of the Liberal Democrats and the coalition. You stood on a series of promises. We know fees is the most prominent one, and then as soon as you got in there, you turned out to be the lapdog of the majority party, probably because you couldn't do anything else. So what you're now arguing is that you can be the opposition. So are you saying that you, the Liberal Democrats, will have more MPs than the Conservative Party in the House of Commons?
That I don't know.
But that's your pitch here. You said make us the official opposition.
Make us an effective opposition, yes. I think it's likely that the Conservative Party will be smaller than the rest of the parties that are in the government, in Parliament. Yes, I think that, just looking at the polls, is probably going to be the way. So to have who are the people that are going to do that, could be us, then yes. And do you want me to talk about the coalition stuff? Or was that...
It's not up to me, it's entirely up to you. You're appealing... These people's votes are what you want.
You've all heard it. Do you want me to talk about the coalition stuff?
No. Right. All right.
Okay. But there was a load of stuff that we did, like the Green Bank.
You are going to talk about it now, even though they tell you not to.
Stop. Right.
So look, okay. I mean, the Liberal Democrats are always in this bind, aren't they? I mean, you are always, since the early part of the 20th century, you've been a third party. So you've got to find some way, as you say, of being a wedge party or in some way creating that pressure, either in coalition or as an opposition or whatever. So you've got a series of policies. In a sense, that's not the issue, as you're saying. You're saying the issue is the national vote. Can you get enough national votes in order to create that kind of political capital. That's what you're really saying, isn't
Yeah.
it? So if that's the case, and you are faced with what looks like to be, the polls seem to indicate that we are going to have a change of government, and it will be a Labour government, and it will be a Labour government with a majority of some size. What is the one issue, do you think, that the Liberal Democrats can be taken seriously on by Labour?
Healthcare.
But in what way are you saying something different about healthcare than either Layla or Thomas?
Social care reforms.
Okay, go on. What is Liberal Democrat policy that's more effective than
Liberal
anything else?
Democrat policy is that there should be free personal care for everyone that needs it. Now, that's going to do two things. The first thing it's going to do is actually relieve some of the financial pressure on some of the people in our community who most need that relief. But the other thing that reforming social care is going to do is going to unblock a lot of the beds in our hospital system, as I'm sure Layla will agree. You know, the biggest blocker is people that are sat in beds, they can't get out. If we overhaul that social care system, we will free up beds.
People have been saying this for every decade that I can remember I've been engaged in politics. People have been saying we've got to fix the social care system. It says provide free personal care for people at home, covering nursing, hygiene and medication support. That's the official position of the Liberal Democrats. You're going to have to convince Rachel Reeves, if indeed Labour is the government, you're going to have to convince Rachel Reeves that she needs to spend more money, save money on the NHS, transfer money. What are the really compelling arguments that you think that she will actually listen to, though? Because she has said, actually, we can't afford to invest, expand taxation and so on and so forth. We have to find growth. So what's your compelling Liberal Democrat argument?
Well, the compelling Liberal Democrat argument is that you can actually fund that by just reversing the banking levy to what it was to 2 or 3 years ago. That's not a wholesale change. So you're not putting a huge tax burden on people. You can tighten up CGT, and that will fund your reforms.
CGT for people who...
No, mainly
that.
for big investment funds that have all sorts of structures.
I'm allergic to acronyms.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were capital gains tax.
Fine. So just last question, though. Will you campaign as Liberal Democrats to reverse the decision on Brexit?
I will. Oh, sorry, I will campaign to reverse the impacts. And if the way you reverse that is you have closer and closer ties with Europe, of course we've got to do that.
But how do you get closer ties with Europe? I should have asked you this, and I might ask you this later. How do you get closer ties with Europe without going back into Europe and becoming part of the EU?
Actually, if you look at the various agreements, the Schengen agreements, everything like that, actually, if you agree free trade and free movement, then you're a long way there. So actually, you don't have to go in; you just have to get those things going.
Get cosy. David Batchelor, ladies and gentlemen, Liberal Democrat candidate.
Thank you.
And finally, bless you for your patience, Debbie. So Debbie Waldman, who is the Green candidate for East Worthing and Shoreham at the Hustings, hosted by Ropetackle and the Shoreham Society. I've got to emphasise that.
So good evening, everybody. It's great to be here in Shoreham, where I first met my husband. Our first date was up the road in the Amsterdam pub some 30 years ago. So don't do the maths, you'll work out. Yes, I am. You'll work out I'm not maybe one of the youngest people in the team. We were very lucky, we were very blessed. We had our 2 boys, we moved to Worthing. I was blessed to become parent governor for Worthing High School. And we really felt as a family, we knew what it meant to have great teachers, great social services. But we also learned about what it was like when that funding is cut, when it becomes thin to vanishing point. I know a bit about not having enough money. As a child, my childhood was not Sky TV like Rishi Sunak. It was actually carpet on the stairs. My family came from Whitehawk in Brighton, and so I know a little bit about what it means to go without. In contrast, my professional career was working at American Express. I was Human Resources Director there, and I ended up leading multi-million-pound projects. Those 2 very different types of experience, I guess what I've learned, is an experience about what makes people thrive, understanding people, and what do we need to really be our best selves. Now, I've always been an active campaigner for social justice and climate justice. And during lockdown, I decided to take that one step further, realised I had a bit more time, although I'm a carer, as referred to earlier. And I actually went back to uni and I graduated last year with a politics degree from Sussex University, a first of which I'm very proud. Thank you. And I guess really that's enough about me. I want to talk to you about 3 key priorities from our manifesto. So the first is that nobody's speaking about the elephant in the room. We live in a coastal community. I've seen the maps on the Friends of Shoreham Facebook page. Many of us are going to be underwater unless we start to do something now. We need a different kind of politics that's going to find alternative to fossil fuels, that's going to find a more natural way to do farming, that's going to bring us better transport, that's going to make financial institutions divest from the fossil fuel industries. And what this manifesto does is put that good foundation at the heart of public policy. The second thing that we want to do is boldly seek to redistribute wealth and power. Too much is being held by too few. The super rich are getting richer, corporations are taking huge advantage, whilst many people are getting poorer. I'm sure there are a number of this in this audience that either are struggling or know people that are struggling in the current cost of living crisis. This has got to change. We cannot go on like this. We need to redistribute both power and wealth to local councils so that more close to the point that it's needed, people can have affordable, sustainable, economically viable houses, particularly for our younger generation, as young people here that my son and his girlfriend who may never get onto the property ladder if we don't start to change things. We also need to make sure that councils have the power to implement rent controls and that can take first dibs on bringing back any housing properties that used to be council house that were since sold off. We've got to make sure that we take the heat out of the housing market and this idea about property. We need to have fairer, greener wealth sharing and housing. And the third and final priority I want to talk about is this manifesto's plan to bring back public services and utilities into public ownership. I commit to you that we will work tirelessly to put people before profit. In January this year, I was at the Surface at Sewage demo down by the lighthouse, and I met a father with a beautiful neurodivergent daughter. And that young woman's mental health is suffering because she can't go swim in the sea as she does to keep healthy. Southern Water has dumped 29,000 dumps across 2023 in our rivers and our seas, and since 1990 has paid billions in dividends to shareholders. This must stop. Thank you. Thank you. What must also stop is the privatisation by stealth of our NHS. This has been enabled by over 14 years of Conservative government, and Labour's West Streeting doesn't seem to say anything different. In contrast, we believe that NHS staff must be paid fairly for the enormous contribution they make. They should be able to live and afford to live without having to rely on food banks. It's criminal. In fact, ordinary people like you and I should be able to access a doctor or a dentist, and we should be able to do this within a reasonable timescale for our basic health needs. We shouldn't be waiting the 28 days average that happened in 23. Thank you, Simon. Fairer, greener, healthier policies, and for the common good. So I'm going to stop. I can hope that you'll see that the Green Party isn't just about trees and bees, although we do care passionately about that too. We are willing to have the tough conversation because we need to make significant changes for the nation's future. And that is why I am asking for your vote. So to recap quickly, we'll centre this climate crisis, the emergency, at the heart of public policy. We'll call for an end to the enrichment of the rich and plan to share wealth and power more fairly, more locally. And finally, we will end the lie that privatisation increases the effectiveness of our public services. It doesn't. It hasn't. They are broken.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sorry. I was running away then. Thank you. Sorry, I was running away, Simon.
So the plan is, so you've got these three big themes, and one of them was the redistribution of wealth and power. And you talked about local services, and you thought about the devolution of power and effectiveness to local councils. Does it not occur to you that people who live in Brighton and Hove, who after a number of years of a Green council so comprehensively trounced the Green Party that it is now reduced to the smallest party in the council, there was no success. Roads are bad, recycling went down, and people's satisfaction with the council services are at rock bottom after those years of Green service. So why should people here put any trust in that idea that you said, which is that practically the Green Party can actually do the nuts and bolts?
And that's passionately said, Simon. I know
No,
you're
not passionately said. It's a serious question.
Yeah, it is a serious question, and I understand that as a resident of Brighton and a former resident myself of Brighton. What I think is very interesting about the current dynamic and the dynamic that has been happening in the last decade and a half is that funding from central government has been cut. So in terms of limits of what local councils can do, they've pretty much had their hands tied.
Yeah, but how come recycling went down under the Greens? How come there were a series of bin strikes and you couldn't sort out the work with the GMB and get the bin strike? How come any of those practical things that residents wanted you to do, you couldn't do, and as a result, you got thrown out of power? And yet you're saying to these people, vote for me because practically we can devolve power to councils and then it'll all be hunky-dory because we'll have done something to the rich.
I think it's a slightly different set of circumstances, and I guess what I would say to that is I don't know the particular details of those specific industrial incidents you're talking about.
I thought you were local.
Yeah, I am to West Sussex, but actually what we do know is that from the perspective of creating good industrial relations, people that are in the jobs that we all rely on, like the bin men, for example, they need an appropriate wage. We've got too many people working in public services that are having to rely on food banks, that are feeling like their backs are against the wall and industrial action is the only thing. We just have to look at what's happening with the junior doctors, and for some of the reasons that Layla's talked about, but also because some of those public services are being starved of cash. So the short answer to your question is we need change, and we need to make sure that as that change is made...
But that's not an answer to my question, I'm afraid. The question was that you said if you devolve power to local councils, you will be able to implement the kind of changes that you talked about. In Brighton and Hove, you had the chance to do it. The people threw you out. They didn't believe that you were effective. So how are you standing up that claim?
Well, I think the circumstances that we're in now are slightly different, and we're talking about what we would do nationally and what that means for...
Hang on a second. You'll get your chance in a minute to ask the question.
And so I think we're in a different set of circumstances with a different set of priorities and certainly a different set of principles in terms of the manifesto and talking about structures for planning, for example. Lots of people in Shoreham are very unhappy with all of the development that's been happening. Certainly that kind of thing needs significant reform.
Okay. So when you talk about the creeping privatisation of the NHS, jolly good slogan, what does it mean?
Oh, there's all sorts of really interesting people to follow that talk about, actually, if you look around at a map of the UK, the whole of the UK, including Scotland, Ireland and Wales, you can see something like 200 NHS trusts that have some form or other of privatisation.
What does privatisation mean? What do you mean by privatisation? Because Tom made the point, and everybody will make the point, that the NHS delivers services free at the point of delivery. Now, there's a big argument about dentistry and opticians, which are not free at the point of delivery. Set those aside. The NHS delivers services free at the point of delivery. So I'm asking you to define, if you would, for these people,
well,
what does creeping privatisation mean?
I'd be surprised if there wasn't somebody...
No, that's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you to define
what
you mean by creeping privatisation.
For things like going to I myself had a child by emergency cesarean, and I've had several gynae problems as a result of that. And when I went to see the specialist, he said, sorry, we can't do that here, but we can refer you through Goring Hall. So actually, my case got referred to Goring Hall to carry out that NHS operation. That's the kind of thing.
Okay, so I have had my right hip done, just to be personal for a minute, and I'm about to have my left hip done. I have gone into this in great detail. It is faster, quicker, and far more clinically effective to have specialist surgeons doing large numbers of elective surgery like hips, like cataracts.
It doesn't have to be done in the private.
It doesn't have to be.
Elsewhere, it's already been done.
What I'm saying is I'm merely using me as an example, and I've looked into this.
Yes,
it's a
exactly.
very effective way. Is that privatisation or is that effective use? I'm not asking you, I'm asking her, sir. Is that effective use of NHS resource because it is cheaper and more efficient and therefore actually saves the NHS money?
I guess what I'd want to know is what's the question behind the question, because what comes before that is a lack of ability, a lack of resource, a lack of the equipment, a lack of everything, because the NHS has been so cash
But if
deprived
the
for last
NHS is
14
paying
years.
less for those operations, does it matter?
I don't think it is.
I'm asking her the question because she talked about creeping privatisation. I'm trying to understand what she means by that and why it doesn't affect have a good effect on the NHS.
Interestingly enough, I think also we don't even really, anybody has a clearly transparent picture about how these different health and related organisations are leeching on the edge of the NHS. My oldest son, who is neurodivergent, we got his diagnosis at 16. I know that our local council had to pay something like £1,000 to an external body to have his assessment done. It's not right. These organisations should not be profiting from it.
Would you privatise drug development, bring drug development into public ownership?
I really can't answer that question. I have pharmaceutical companies amongst my previous clients, but I worked not specifically with the vaccines and diagnostics team, so I wouldn't pertain to answer a question like that, which is far too detailed for me.
And how is the best way? You talked about Southern Water, and it's clearly a huge concern down here because of the sea and the rivers and so on and so forth. And there's quite an argument about whether or not actually it's about the reporting of the amount of effluent that goes into the sea, and that actually reporting has changed and the basis of reporting has changed versus whether there actually is kind of large amounts of sewage in the sea. I'm no expert, so I can't do that. But what I can ask you is, what do you think is the most effective way of, because frankly, it's unlikely that Southern Water or any of the utilities would be taken into public ownership only because of the sheer cost of that. So if that's not likely to happen politically, what is the best way of changing the way in which they've been behaving, the utilities?
Well, that's a great question. I have to disagree with Layla. Unfortunately, one of the things I was very disappointed with was our MP, who's just resigned, Tim Loughton. Surface Against Sewage have been pleading with him for months to facilitate a meeting with the CEO of Southern Water, and he refused to do that, but he took a bunch of sixth form students to meet the head of Southern Water. So I would say we have to get around a table and actually have that conversation about what does progress actually look like.
Debbie Waldman, Green
Thank
Party.
you very much indeed.